So it's basically illegal to release a 7-hour and 53-minute video on a game netting hundreds of thousands of views and not discuss its sequel. The subsection of that law emphasizes this in cases where the original video discussed problems with said sequel. I mean, I didn't write the law. Go read the Declaration of Independence if you don't believe me. So, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. The oft-maligned sequel to Morrowind and Daggerfall, which arguably marked the shift in design philosophy at Bethesda from role-playing game to action-adventure titles. I guess I should say before we get too deep into this that this isn't just going to be a bash session of Oblivion. Of course, someone will try and turn that on me the first time I do criticize the game because they misunderstood the important part of that sentence. I'm going to acknowledge what Oblivion does better than Morrowind, and I'm going to try and avoid spending an excessive amount of time on points where Bethesda has improved since Oblivion. There's no point, for instance, in going on a 30-minute tangent about the failures of FaceGen when later games implemented better systems for character creation. However, just because a later game did something better doesn't mean I shouldn't at least point out its presence in Oblivion. Because even though later games did improve character creation, the decision to implement FaceGen still reflects on the development of Oblivion. FaceGen is a middleware program for non-character artists to create faces, and at the time could at most be used for facial generation of characters where they wouldn't be the primary focus of the camera, example given being Tiger Woods' PGA Tour. It certainly wasn't meant to create thousands of unique, distinguishable character faces, or for those character faces to be plastered front and center for every single dialogue in the entire game. What this tells us about the development of Oblivion was that there simply wasn't time to either implement a better solution or to at least try and mitigate the damage the potato-faced freaks of Cyrodiil have caused the game's tone. With that in mind, it's clear that the decision to use FaceGen was one of time-saving in order to focus on more important elements. Thus, the goal of this video is simple: to demonstrate the impact the 2006 launch date and goal of being an early 7th generation console release had on the overall Elder Scrolls formula. This was originally a 12-hour-long video analysis of Oblivion. Over the years, people have been asking me to upload my quick retrospectives onto audio streaming platforms, and I decided, rather than simply ripping the audio from YouTube and uploading that, I'd actually sit down and create an updated audio remaster. If you're not familiar with my work, hello. I've been doing this for some time, and these have traditionally been audio-focused experiences, made partially from my frustration from listening to older long-form analysis videos and missing key information. This remaster has done some extra work to try to make it a truly audio-only experience. Ideally, this depends on the platform. You should be able to check the description for a list of timestamps for relevant sections of this analysis. It's less like one continuous movie, and more like episodes in a series compiled in one place for convenience. So if you don't have time for the full thing, you just listen to one part and work your way through it over time. I listen to this type of content all the time while walking, working out, doing errands, and even playing games. You don't need to have listened to my analysis of Morrowind to understand this one. Anything I bring up on the topic are explained with enough context to understand the point. I'd also suggest writing down timestamps of when you stop, or aiming to stop at the hard section breaks. If there are comments, you can potentially use that. Think of it like a bookmark. As long as length was not a factor in writing the original script. I don't aim for certain length and then stretch out the material. This is not a college essay, and my grade isn't tied to how many words I write. Making these analyses are easier when there's less material I need to edit together. I write to the length I feel is necessary to cover the material. There used to be a lot of people who were really opposed to my style of content, but they've disappeared over the years as it's become more normalized. In the description, you'll also find a bibliography. All of the interviews, articles, videos, songs, and hopefully images are sourced best I could in there. I still consider the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages the gold standard for online wikis, and would highly recommend using them over fandom. The information they've curated has been extremely helpful in making my work more accurate. However, this is not me reading their wiki for 12 hours. If you click around random parts of this analysis, you will probably click onto a section where I am discussing the plot. This is because literary analysis is the skeleton of my work, upon which the meat of both objective critique and subjective perspectives are hung. For example, rather than dedicating a full section to combat, combat is interwoven into a relevant part of the story. Some people think pointing out that some of my work is hinged on subjectivity is a diss, but I've never self-styled myself as the everything I say is objectively correct guy. There's plenty of objective stuff in here. I mean, if I say there are 4 bandits, that's not an opinion. And just because I use sources or make long videos doesn't mean I consider myself particularly intelligent or better than other people. I learned to do research and sources in the 9th grade. It's just weird when I read hate comments that write their own fanfiction about what my work is implying. Like people who think that this entire video is me saying Oblivion is bad and Morrowind is the GOAT. I've got criticisms of Morrowind later in the script. I mean, fair's fair. I do think one game is better than the other. Of course, I would talk about the predecessor game in a series and how it differs from the sequel. Like, that's the most fair comparison you're able to make. Now, on to Oblivion.
Why do Morrowind videos have to tear down Oblivion so much? It's just like Oblivion was better anyways, and that's proven by how successful you'd be. My goal is not to prove Oblivion is good or bad. There's no point to it. I don't make more money for it. I don't stake my identity on it. My goal is to analyze the series that I love in the interest that a developer, be they at Bethesda or at any studio, can take a piece of my passion and make a better game. Morrowind is a broken, dated game. Just because I like or praise it doesn't imply that I think it's perfection. In fact, I spent 8 hours talking about it. Do you think it was 8 hours of me saying I love Morrowind over and over like a mantra? Of course not. And I find it extremely annoying when people boil an entire video's worth of arguments down to some kind of misplaced loyalty, because that's not how normal people work. An immediate comparison that's going to be made is to Will Love's Video Game's own 5-hour retrospective of Oblivion. I know this because people already make the comparison with my Morrowind analysis. I think it's a good video. I applaud the effort. However, you probably can't find somebody I'm going to disagree with more on Oblivion. I watched this video while live posting on my Discord because I was only making it a couple minutes at a time before I'd have to pause due to some of the arguments Will makes. And I disagreed with him so heavily a few people thought I was going to make an entire video breaking down why he's wrong, which would be both mean-spirited and honestly a waste of time.
A live stream is different than a prepared, pre-written breakdown. Will's video isn't that bad enough to merit dozens of hours of writing, recording, and editing that would take to make.
If you're worried that this video is just going to be a repeat of his, I can guarantee it is not based on our stylistic differences. Instead, I'm going to use his video and others as examples. I don't mean ill will by this. Believe it or not, it's possible to disagree with somebody and not hate them. I fully expect the same to happen to me. This is all overstating the presence of these clips, however. We're giving 3 paragraphs to something that will be less than 1% of the video because it will be very easy for people to get the wrong impression because they decided to space out or skip this section. I mean, if you want proof that it's not mean-spirited, you should realize that me even including these clips is a sign that they at least tried to say something, compared to the myriad of Oblivion videos which say nothing and could have been written off in a bingo card of common topics. Be sure to grab your bingo card before watching my video.
You will have to keep track of your own bingo progress though, and the audio format does not help this bit. The origin of the bingo card was tropes in various Oblivion videos I noticed in watching them. Without the visual element, my deadpan tone will make it sound like I'm just regurgitating those tropes.
Another comparison will be to the more recent Private Sessions Oblivion video series. I was actually worried because I only saw this one after I'd finished the script. However, upon watching it, I was relieved to find that this too won't be an issue. Each contributor to the Oblivion long-form video subgenre has brought a unique perspective to the series.
After releasing my original Oblivion analysis, there was another big retrospective style video that was released by a former fan of mine, Superrad. It's useful as an example of what my video would actually look like if the people who criticize it without watching were correct. If you think I'm just padding my runtime, or if it just seems like I'm reading wiki articles, or that all I'm doing is passing off my subjective opinions, you should check out the Superrad video, and then stop. I think the fact that he gets something as basic as the release date wrong represents the entire video.
The Elder Scrolls gameplay reveal and trailer were met with positive reception, and the game's release in 2007, followed by its PS3 release in 2008, met equal praise.
And this isn't bait for comments engagement. There's tons of stuff in the first 30 minutes that's either wrong or just presented in a confusing manner, like an entire section on Gavin Carter's opinions on side quests and how Oblivion didn't match his vision. You think? It's almost as though he was a low-level producer who was not a key decision maker on Oblivion. But you wouldn't know that just from watching his video, because Superrad couldn't be bothered to actually cite this take that he's responding to. But he did find the time to post a comic of Sonic saying crunch is bad. It's obvious he loves Oblivion. The fact that I was critical of elements of it is why he started to dislike me. That's why it's confusing he decided to do the game and its developers 0 favors with this video. Research and citations not only help your points be stronger, but also allow people to come to their own conclusions and be factually accurate. The benefit of this is when developers like Christiana Meister and Megan Sawyer come under attack in 2025 just for being women, people can actually quantify what their work was in defending them. Sawyer is a world artist who made Shaden Hall and the area for the quest through A Nightmare Darkly, which is some of the higher rated content in the game. Meister is the lead character artist who guided the vision of what NPCs would look like in Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Whether you think the beast race in Morrowind or Skyrim look better, you can blame or thank her for that. But I take partial credit in moving the standard away from just giving Todd Howard credit or blame for everything, which was the old meta.
Another thing at some point is somebody's going to bring up a lore argument which is contingent on information gleaned from Elder Scrolls Online. Firstly, Michael Kirkbride wrote a story called Coda, which says I can pick and choose what games and mods are canon for me, and second, I haven't played ESO very much. But I have played enough to know that it breaks existing canon quite significantly, and it's fine if you're into it, but I'm not. So if we start talking about Mana Marco and you bring up that he was the villain of ESO, I cannot be compelled to care.
The biggest factor is the fact that ESO was developed by a different company and released 8 years after Oblivion, and its expansions even further after. The reason this is relevant is that obviously the people making Oblivion have no clue there's even going to ever be an Elder Scrolls MMO when they wrote this stuff in 2004. It doesn't matter that someone wrote some lore copium a decade later to explain some old plot hole because that lore copium isn't in Oblivion. You know, like the game that we're analyzing.
I feel there may be some people whose knowledge of the lore comes exclusively from lore videos. That's okay. But lore videos make it difficult to distinguish what source a piece of information comes from. Example given, Umbra. Umbra is a sword created by a witch that has the power to steal souls. That's it. In Morrowind, a guy named himself after his sword Umbra, not because he was bewitched by it, but because his name was ultimately irrelevant. You might as well have called him by his sword's name due to violence being his life's accomplishment. That's it. Oblivion would change this canon to make the sword more malicious in its powers. And the novel Umbriel would change the canon further to elaborate that Clavicus Vile was involved in the creation of the sword. However, a future novel does not inform the narrative role Umbra plays in Oblivion. It's only reasonable to criticize Oblivion by the information that it provides and its prequels had provided. Time effectively stops at the date of release. But what about Skyrim lore? I extend a courtesy to Skyrim lore that I do not to other future lore sources, frankly, because I like Skyrim well enough to do so. In addition, Skyrim doesn't go crazy with the recontextualizations, and when it does, like with the skeleton key, I'll mention it and draw where the line is. You might say it's hypocritical to include Skyrim lore but not ESO lore, and the line is this. First of all, it's just video games, it's not that big a deal. Second, ESO likes nostalgia bait and loves recontextualization. Seriously, read a lore page about anything in Morrowind, Oblivion, or Skyrim, and you'll eventually see something from ESO. The thing is, Skyrim was an independent game. It loved its predecessors, and it made references to them, but it never really tried to change anything about Morrowind or Oblivion. Like, the most egregious thing in Skyrim is that you can wield Keening without Wraithguard and it doesn't immediately kill you. The number of people who are massive Morrowind fans that don't say Skyrim is non-canon says something about the respect that game had for its past stories. It's the same reason why Fallout 3, 4, and 76 wouldn't come up in a discussion of Fallout 1 and 2, but New Vegas would. Now, this may sound odd, but there are no fast travel services at Telfir. Despite stating this objective fact, there are people in the comment section of my Morrowind video who have claimed to the contrary. They're technically correct in that they do indeed remember there being a boat captain at Telfir. So how can this be? The problem here is the Morrowind Patch Project, which for a spell was the popular option for patching Morrowind of its major bugs. However, it's also fairly controversial as the patch attempts to balance aspects of the game and fix things that arguably weren't broken in the first place. One of those fixes being the re-addition of Senia Yurdius to the game. The reason I believe she was cut is due to one of the earlier Telvanni quests where you're dispatched to deliver a letter to Divith Fear, and are given several implements of getting to the island by foot, implying that the writer intended for the quest to not have a means of easily getting to Telfir. The conflict is easy to see once you realize that Divith Fear was the creation of Ken Rolston, and Hel's Telvanni was the creation of Douglas Goodall. Rolston likely added Senia to the game as the main quest was written first, and Goodall likely removed her when he later wrote House Telvanni. This is relevant as this video is using several patches. I originally imagined the series would be played unpatched, to review as accurately a version to the game to Bethesda's intentions as possible. But one look at the UESP page on fixes by the unofficial Oblivion patch has swayed that decision, simply from a production standpoint. Plus, unlike Morrowind, I'm not going to play an unideal version simply to prove a point.
You cannot acquire the Necromancer's Amulet in Oblivion after completing the Mages Guild. Like Xenia Yurdius, people are going to disagree with that statement, as they will have clear memories of getting the amulet from the nightstand in the Archmage's quarters at the Arcane University after completing the Mages Guild. But that is an addition of the unofficial Oblivion patch. The Necromancer's Amulet, in the base game, is permanently given up at the end of its titular quest. If I say something that you remember being different, it is possible that is because we are not technically talking about the same game. Given the immensity of material we have to go over, I can't account for all of these minor discrepancies, so I simply ask you to consider that fact before calling me out. Speaking of remembering things differently, that was weird. Why do I feel like a bunch of people should be commenting on my accent? Now I say the word Nernroot.
A few other mods were used as well. A mod to prevent some crashes, not that it entirely worked. A mod to maintain a higher field of view without having to type the command every 5 minutes. And a mod that allows me to have a high but capped frame rate with borderless full screen. The first and third mods are to help with the recording, while the second mod is both for my benefit as a player and your benefit as a viewer. So now let's talk about why I don't use other mods. Sure, plenty of issues that I'm going to bring up can potentially be fixed with a mod, but I think that modifying mechanics or design effectively invalidates any arguments I can make. Because at what point am I criticizing the designers at Bethesda, and at what point am I criticizing the mod authors?
I'm also not going to be talking about changes in the remaster because that wasn't out when the script was originally written, and this is focused on the original version of the game.
I have to speak to the version of the game that Bethesda created. The unofficial patch resolves a lot of issues still in the game, but I think it bears mentioning that I don't really think it's alright for that many issues to still be present. And most of these issues can be sidestepped by playing exact ways around certain problems. I used it anyways more so as insurance that I would be able to complete my playthrough with as little console interference as possible, and even that wasn't a guarantee. My mod setup is akin to playing OpenMW. I don't see an issue with reviewers using source ports of Doom 2 as long as the source port's faithful to the original vision. Sure, using a mod to fix the leveling system could make my experience better, but this isn't a Let's Play or livestream channel, this is analysis. If something's so awful that it requires me to go out of my way to track down a modification, install it, and make sure it doesn't conflict with other modifications, then that's an issue worth commenting on, isn't it? More to the point, doing such an analysis would be feeding into the complacency of modern Bethesda, who can release broken game after broken game with the expectation that the community will step in, fix the game for them, and then thank them for the opportunity to do so, after having paid full price for the game and whatever DLCs attached. I mean, have you tried playing Fallout 3 without fan patches lately? The game doesn't even start on Windows 10. Before you say that compatibility changes over time, Morrowind and Oblivion still run out of the box on Windows 10. I do like the modding community, and maybe one day I'll do a video where I do a super modded playthrough to showcase their work, but that day isn't today. We're talking about Oblivion, the game that was created by Bethesda. Thanks to the UESP, they've cataloged many of the issues that can occur if you don't have the unofficial patch installed, which should be handy in discussing problems I didn't personally experience because of the patch, which are still in the game despite the several official patches that did happen. This is a continuation of our Morrowind character, specifically our character from the main quest. Unfortunately for the Nerevarine, a mix-up at the East Empire Company means all those crimes committed by Umbra got pinned on him instead. That 300,000 gold bounty translates roughly to an 8-year prison sentence in Tamrielic law, of which he's currently served 6 years since the end of Blood Moon. 6 years in the Imperial City Rehabilitation and Corrections Facility. Since each day represents a skill point lost, our skills were reset back to default again. The only reason this was allowed was that the Nerevarine's lawyer forgot to take his Fortify Intelligence potion that morning and did such a horrific job at legal defense he was also thrown in prison in the cell across from his client. Now, while it's fun to pretend that each Elder Scrolls protagonist is the same character, they can't and really shouldn't be. This is mostly just a way of saying I'm playing the same Breton battle mage born under the Atronax sign again. I'm also not going to be playing multiple characters like I did in my Morrowind video. There are several reasons for this decision, ranging from the fact that you really don't need to the fact that you really shouldn't. This game is a complicated tapestry, and fully appreciating its higher levels requires a single character. For now, let's discuss Oblivion's introduction. It starts with a word from Captain Picard about his imminent death and how that will lead to the destruction of life on Tamriel. This is a tad more active than the prophecy stuff presented in Morrowind, which was largely written off by the first character you meet as a dream. Azura in that cutscene mostly just says that you've been chosen for some unspecified task and then you wake up. Here, Professor Xavier tells us how urgent the situation is and then shows us the consequences for ignoring it. Write that down, it's important later. After that, we create our character, which can range from hilarious Shrek monster to an approximation of the human form. The faults of Oblivion's face gen are fairly self-evident. However, it's important to remember that the goofier faces you encounter are a consequence of them being intentionally created that way, and not necessarily just because face gen itself is faulty. The game basically just packages the same exact tools the designer had for character creation with a fancy UI. Regardless, once you have your creature ready, you're deposited into your prison cell. We're never given a reason for why we're in prison, how long we've been here, or how long our sentence is. That said, it's an open enough prompt to adjust it to whatever character we want. Maybe we're a petty thief, or a murderer, or it's just wrongful imprisonment. Whatever the case, it doesn't last, as after a racial lashing from the Dunmer across the hall, none other than Emperor Uriel Septim VII himself arrives with an armed escort to escape the city through our prison cell. The Emperor is pretty savvy at recognizing protagonists, so he keeps his guards from killing us and we're able to follow him out. Oblivion's tutorial sequence is markedly different from Morrowind's, but sets the formula going forward for Elder Scrolls and Elder Scrolls spin-offs like Fallout. You see, Morrowind and Oblivion have speedruns that are fairly similar in length. However, the difference is that Oblivion's speedrun is mostly spent in the tutorial, while Morrowind's blows past it in less than a minute. Morrowind has a short, mandatory tutorial and a longer, optional tutorial. This makes it easy for players who want to quickly jump into the game proper to just install the game and get going. Oblivion's tutorial, on the other hand, is a 30-minute time investment independent of the amount of time spent customizing your character's appearance or crafting a class. Of course, Oblivion vets will say to just make a save before exiting the sewers, but, well, that's kind of the point, isn't it? Bethesda could have easily built in a prompt after we make our character offering to skip straight to the end so that we can get our character underway. In fact, I've implemented such a thing already, albeit in Morrowind, but it's the same general design structure in Oblivion, just longer. Even if you wanted the narrative section, we actually will see later that the area is only long because it forces the player through a massive detour. If the player selects our new skip tutorial option, they could just follow the Emperor through this door and skip the 15-minute test to gauge the player's preferred class. Testing the player's preferred class is a decent idea in principle, possibly even something worth improving upon, but boy howdy does this section create problems for min-maxers. Since most of our skills are pretty low level, it's easy to level skills down here, meaning that our stat alignment may be potentially messed up before we even get our chance to rest. I actually tried getting through the tutorial without leveling anything up, and it basically required cheating. There is a way, but again, we'll talk about min-maxing later. This section's also a pretty poor introduction to magic. The game does a decent job of introducing combat and stealth playstyles, yet you're limited to a minor healing spell and a basic targeted fire spell. It's no surprise those two spells are what you see most people using. You only get the other spells if you select their school as major skills after class creation, meaning that players have to pick the skills on blind faith. Which is how it was in Morrowind, don't get me wrong, but Morrowind doesn't start with a 30-minute forced introductory sequence that was meant to showcase potential playstyles to the player. I'm going to be in a minority of review channels that primarily use magic, and I think that this is part of the problem. Oblivion's introduction is so long as to discourage repeat playthroughs for casual players. Casual players aren't introduced to magic, so they don't use it. Or they do use it, but they stick to the basic paradigm of destruction and restoration.
It actually turns out there is a huge issue with anti-magic discrimination in Elder Scrolls analysis videos, possibly in general.
Near to the end of the sequence is the infamous scene where the player is handed the Amulet of Kings, gets frozen in place, and then is forced to watch the Emperor get assassinated as we're powerless to do anything. There's a way to accomplish the latter without drawing the ire of the player, which is to have the assassin appear using an invisibility effect before casting Paralyze on the player. As to the former, well, it would take a complete rewrite of this opening to fix the problem that the tutorial giving us the Amulet of Kings creates. The problem, for those unaware, is that the player is effectively handed a permanent and constant reminder of the main quest. Theoretically, you should be able to leave the tutorial and go off to live whatever life you want, as you could in Morrowind. The orders to go to Caius Cassades can be dropped and ignored at any time, and even if you do the first quest given to the player, Caius will tell you to go off and get some experience before giving you the next quest anyways. The main quest of Morrowind is voluntary from a role-playing perspective, making it easy to justify ignoring to go off exploring. In Oblivion, however, you are heavily pushed towards pursuing the main quest. Even if you do as the Emperor asks and deliver the amulet to Joffrey, he'll immediately push you into the next quest at Kvatch. This is where someone will proudly announce that despite their numerous hours in Oblivion, they've never done the game's main quest. I'm not sure why people feel compelled to keep mentioning that they haven't. I suppose as some kind of praise of how much they enjoy playing the game that they haven't even done the questline that marks an arbitrary end of the game. I mean, the main quest is in the middle of this review, so you can tell that I don't really consider it the end either. Just because you ignored the urgent crisis of this game doesn't mean I can justify doing so. Although Jake Decker over at GameSpot had an interesting take on this.
You can quite literally take Patrick Stewart's words of warning as the ramblings of an old man approaching his death and do whatever the hell you want.
The issue with this, however, is the omniscient pre-rendered cutscene that starts the game with Uriel showing you Oblivion on the march. Morrowind sidestepped the problem of Azura telling you were the chosen one in the opening cutscene by immediately introducing a character who tells you were dreaming. Uriel, inversely, tells you hell is invading and that today he is destined to die, and then the latter comes true. The only way a main quest would be the end of an Elder Scrolls game would be if the central conflict of the main quest is present in all the other quest lines as well, example given being Fallout New Vegas or Morrowind. There's like one quest that isn't part of the main quest line that involves the Oblivion crisis. Otherwise, it might as well not be happening to the perspective of anyone not directly involved in the main quest. I look at role-playing games from a, role-playing perspective. And from that perspective, being told that the world is about to end before having an important artifact tied to the fate of the world thrust into my hands is not something I can just ignore, outside of maybe the most irresponsible, skooma-addled degenerate imaginable. A person with even a smidgen of responsibility would recognize the need to participate, if only to preserve their own life. Boris, one of the blades guarding the Emperor, allows us to leave with the amulet as he believes he needs to protect the Emperor's body. This is silly, as not only is the amulet super important, as stated, but I think most people's first instinct would be to assume the person standing over a corpse is the one responsible for the corpsifying, even if temporarily until Boris noticed the dead Mythic Dawn agent. The beautiful thing about a setting with magic is that this can be explained if you try to put the slightest bit of effort into writing. Just say the Emperor used a spell to bind the amulet to us, which can only be broken if the player dies or reaches Joffrey, and that Boris recognizes that the Emperor probably knew something he didn't to go to the effort to entrust the amulet with us. The Emperor was a known practitioner of mysticism magic, after all. After this is a short sequence in the sewers proper, which I question the need for. There's no reason this area couldn't deposit straight into the area right before the surface access tunnel. At this point, the tutorial is over, and not even the most pedantic of nitpickers like myself would have criticized you for killing the Emperor mere feet away from the surface. As it stands, it's just an odd decision to have a couple more enemies before freedom. It could be to test your build, I guess, but this only works once. Anyways, after this we're deposited into Cyrodiil, while you are, as the game says, free to set off in any direction. It also makes a point of telling the player to go to Wayne Priory to deliver the amulet. And the amulet will take top billing in the equipment section of the inventory screen, a constant reminder that we're going to ignore for a while.